Hello, and welcome back to Around the Counter with Molly and Friends. I'm Molly Jones, and this is a podcast for people who care about Utah politics. Joining me today around the counter is Dr. Jacob Rugh. He is a professor of sociology at Brigham Young University. He got his PhD at Princeton studying public affairs and urban policy and is an expert on demographics and voting patterns. And he's the chair of House District 60 for the Utah County Democratic Party. Welcome, Professor Rugh.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Have you been watching any of the World Cup?
We have been. We've been watching with our family and enjoying. And I got one child rooting for Spain and one for France today. So
Ooh, okay. Are you personally rooting for anyone?
I'm rooting for a good game. I've liked it. I mean, I was rooting for Cabo Verde and for the upset, so they didn't pull it off, but they had the best goal of the World Cup. How about you?
I was definitely a Norway fan. I have been absolutely just chortling all night over the image of Holland departing the plane with a taxidermied raccoon. And I just like, I just love the Norway feelings. They evoked a lot of really like good,
Yeah.
strong feelings in me. And I just felt really good about it. So kind of sad that they're gone, but I'll probably root for, I don't know, England or Argentina. Hard to say. I just like
Yeah.
a good game.
Yeah, for sure. We lived in England for a little while, so maybe them. It's been a good World Cup. It's been a good respite, you know. It's
Yeah.
fun to see the games in Mexico and Canada, all over the US, and just the fans just come together and love one another. It's just awesome.
Yeah, I've been feeling like there's this just overriding sentiment within the World Cup that America is cool.
Mhm.
And that's kind of weird because I feel like we've been having a hard time the last, decade or so. And so it's really nice to invite the world into the US and to see us rise to the occasion. I've really enjoyed that.
Yes, absolutely.
So I saw recently that you gave a talk to the Davis County Democratic Party about trends in Utah, specifically for the Democratic Party. And then you elucidated some strategies on how to capitalize on those trends. I thought it was a fascinating talk, and I've been to a couple of talks you've given along these similar lines over the last 2 years or so. So I just was so excited that you agreed to come on the pod and talk about your research. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's great to be here.
Let's start with the big picture of Utah's shifting demographics. So, your data shows that Utah has actually swung blue more than any other state since 2004 or 2012. Like, talk to us about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So back in 2004, 2012, people like Mitt Romney and George W. Bush were getting, 70, 75% of the vote. That's come way down with this MAGA era that we're in, with Trump running at the top of the ticket now three times, 2016, 2020, and 2024. So Utah in 2024, it swung blue more than any other state the past dozen or 20 years, more than Colorado, Maryland, lots of other states that have moved left quite a bit. It's really remarkable. That's on the one end, Republicans coming down from the peak of, Romney and George W. Bush. I just can't believe it's only been 12 years. It feels like a lifetime ago.
Yeah.
But also on the Democratic side, Biden really broke through and got, a tremendous amount of votes and vote support. And then with Kamala Harris getting nearly 38%, having the highest Democratic vote share since LBJ won Utah in 1964. So Republicans coming down, Democrats going up at the top of the ticket is a big, big story. And people are starting to notice Utah's big blue swing, as I call it.
So, are we actually becoming more big D Democratic?
Yeah, so there's multiple ways of measuring that. So at the top of the ticket, presidential vote, absolutely number one state moving left. In terms of people voting for other offices like Senate, other statewide offices, not as much. Although people like Mike Lee, who've been connected to MAGA, trying to overturn legitimate election in 2020 and many other things and misdeeds, he underperformed as well. Doing really poorly. I mean, his hometown here in Provo only got 50% of the vote. Won
In this
54.
most recent
Yeah,
election?
in 2022 U.S. Senate election, only won
What was
50-46.
what was he previously polling at?
He was doing, at least 67, 70%, 77, in this area. So he's come way down along with Trump. So those who are really connected to MAGA, and we can get into other details of others, not doing as well. So that shows that their opponents can capitalize on that. But when it comes to people registering to vote, and we'll talk more about this later, a lot of people do register Republican in Utah to vote for a more moderate candidate in the primary, and you can't take anything away from them. It makes total sense. But that does boost the share of people registered Republican. Um, there are over 500,000 unaffiliated voters now in Utah. I think that's only active, actually. Unaffiliated. So there are a lot of people, especially younger voters, and this is true in other states like Nevada, who are saying, I don't want to be on either team, blue team, red team. Harris did win, unaffiliated voters last time. So they're always going to be a swing group. They're going to be a younger group, tends to be less engaged. So there's always that middle ground as well. Um, and then one thing we're seeing this year, just to finish answering your question, is we actually are seeing a big surge in Democratic voter registrations in 2026. They're up 10,000.
Wow.
Republicans are down 4,000. Independents are up about half as much, 5,000. So there's been a big swing, 15,000 towards independent and Democratic, and Republicans going down by 4,000. So it's an unusual year. It's clearly a big year. It's a big blue wave in the country. So we're starting to see some new shifts as well.
Do you consider this to be a Trump penalty?
Yeah, so part of what I look at in terms of how Republicans are doing worse is kind of looking at, Trump doing worse himself, and then people like Mike Lee, Burgess Owens, and others who's not running again, but also voted to overturn the election results on the night of January 6th, which is incredible to me. They have paid a penalty for being MAGA. So Republicans doing worse is both a Trump thing and a MAGA thing. And it's interesting to see in some of the primaries this year, some of the voters penalizing and voting out incumbents, people like the former Senate President Stuart Adams, who are being seen as being too extreme and being, uh, you know, not ethical when it comes to the data center and other things. So there is that's starting to come down ballot more. But that's obviously the $72,000 question, right? How much of what's
Yeah.
happened at the top will come down to local office?
Did Senator John Curtis experience a Trump penalty when he ran, the same way that you're saying Mike Lee has?
No, yeah, and I think that's because he was seen as somebody who was gonna kind of inherit the position of Romney and be a moderate and be good on the environment. I'm not aware of any really good votes that I could publicize about Curtis, that he's really been like Mitt Romney. I think he's fallen far short of that. It doesn't mean he's a bad person or any judgment, just that he hasn't risen to the occasion. Um, he's disagreed on some things with Trump very symbolically. But yeah, he's been seen as a moderate, the same way the governor was before, Cox and others. And so he didn't pay the same penalty. And he obviously didn't take the same votes, right? He didn't vote to overturn the election results. He and Blake
Hmm.
Moore did not do that, while people like Burgess Owens did and Mike Lee, right? So that clearly separates them on matters like that.
That's interesting. And so you've talked a little bit about Romney Republicans and how Curtis was trying to take the mantle of being a Romney Republican.
Mhm.
Um, and I've saw in your data that you talk a little bit about Romney Republicans are splitting their ticket. Can you explain to us ticket splitting and then the
Sure.
trend that you're seeing there?
Yeah, absolutely. So a big thing that we have in Utah that's driving what we're talking about this entire conversation are people who are Romney Republicans who voted for Romney, who obviously did really well in Utah, but now they are voting for Democrats like Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, right? So the way I like to think about this group is it's a pretty big group, right? I mean, it's maybe 15, 20% of voters in Utah. So this is big, right? Any election that's decided by 10 to 20 points, right? They're pivotal. They're even bigger in places like Provo and Bountiful, places that have a lot of LDS or Mormon voters. And the way I think about them is like Republicans who voted, Democrats who voted for Reagan in the 1980s, right? And they were
Mm,
called the Reagan Democrats. They're very famous in states like Michigan and elsewhere in the country. They kept saying, I'm a Democrat, and then voting for Reagan, right? Over
wow.
and over multiple times. And so in today's age, we have a lot of voters who are keeping their Republican registration, they're keeping their identity. Mitt Romney, for example, is always going to maintain being a Republican, but saying, I am against Trump, being vocal about it, being against extremism, the MAGA movement, January 6th. right? All the other excesses. Um, that's a very significant thing in Utah, right? Because it's a lot of people. Um, and it's interesting to see them really drive. I mean, it depends on how you look at things, but they pretty much are driving most of the change in Utah, right? Republicans who changed their mind and are voting against Trump at the top, Mike Lee below him, and then others, right? And that is significant, right? It's a huge deal that's driving the change. And so I call them, right, like Romney, Harris Republicans, right? Or the Biden Harris Republicans. And they really typify that split in the Republican Party in a state like Utah, where MAGA has taken the longest to try to overtake the Republican Party. It's taken so many years compared to other states. So there's still this tussle, right, among Republicans. It's very interesting. So if you're somebody who cares about the vote totals and who wins at the end of the day, that's of more interest to me than say identity politics and how people identify in terms of identity politics.
Interesting. To put some numbers to what you're talking about here, there was a pretty huge swing in requested ballots this year. So Lanny Chapman, the Salt Lake County clerk, she said, or she's quoted as saying, there were 7,534 Democratic mail-in ballots requested for the June 23 primary, compared to 2022, where only around 1,300 Democratic primary ballots were requested.
Mm-hmm.
So what does this say about the broader voting trends in Utah, if anything?
Yeah. I think it shows exactly the dynamic, the mirror image of what we were talking about earlier, right? That people want to vote in the primaries as a Republican to vote for their candidate of choice. And now that we have Congressional District 1, which is
Hmm.
solely based in Utah County, which
Utah
is,
County?
excuse me, Salt Lake County,
Okay.
in Salt Lake County, which is a blue district, right? That I think voted for Harris for about 14 points, right?
Hmm.
Now those voters, right, that otherwise might have been in a different primary saying, well, I want to have a voice in who represents us in Congress because they know it will be a Democrat, right? And so, 7,000 votes, 7,000 voters, right, requested ballots. It ended up not being that close. So it didn't decide anything,
Hmm.
but they were able to have a say. And it's interesting, okay, political scientists and social scientists will point this out. It's interesting, right, that we have one party that says that no matter what party you are, you can vote in our parties, right, the Democratic Party. And then the other party saying, no, it's actually a closed primary and you have to register Republican. And if you were Democratic, you have to do it months in advance. And so they know that there is a tug of war, right, between MAGA and the mainstream, big business, traditional, classic Republicans like Mitt Romney. And so they try to influence that through the rules, right? I mean, it's very obvious, but it's interesting now with some of these issues like immigration and the data centers and others that in these primaries we saw so many incumbent Republicans lose this cycle. I was pretty stunning.
Yeah, I want to stick to the numbers a little bit because what you're saying here is that in order for these 7,500 people to receive a Democratic
Mhm.
ballot in Salt Lake County to vote in the Congressional District 1 race, they were registered as unaffiliated, third party, or Republican.
Mhm.
They had to call or email or fill out a form online that said,
Yep. Yeah, they
I
have it
want a
online
Democratic.
on their
Okay.
website. Yep.
So I want to vote as a in the Democratic primary. So they requested that, and that's, roughly 7 times the number that has happened in the past.
Yeah.
So I guess to dig into this a little bit deeper, you tracked the June 2026 Democratic primary for Congressional District
Mhm.
1 where Ben McAdams won with 52% of the vote.
That's right.
And there's been a lot of progressive chatter, and we talked about this with Nate Bluen's Gambit, that if the other candidates had coalesced behind one progressive, either Farrell, Muhammad, or Bluen, that McAdams would have lost. But your precinct maps actually show him, McAdams,
Mhm.
winning heavy margins in working class areas like Taylorsville and West Jordan, which tells
Yeah.
me personally that what works in Brooklyn, looking at Mom Donnie, doesn't work in Salt Lake County. So, what does the primary outcome tell you about what Utah Democrats actually want in a leader? And we can compare that to someone like John
Yeah.
Curtis or Mike Lee or Trump.
Right, right. Yeah, so McAdams before was representing very much a 50-50 district, right? Close elections and very much tilted to the center, clearly, Democrat and a proud Democrat. But he had a different district, right? So
Hmm.
now in this new district, right, there was this potential, well, maybe he won't win. He ended up getting 52% of the vote. And like you said, the other candidates fractured the vote. So if you combine them, that's 48%, right? So it's like, oh, actually, that's pretty close, right? Like if they just had one, maybe they could have done it. Maybe, right? But
Hmm.
that doesn't automatically translate, right? Um, so clearly he's going to have competition every 2 years if he continues to run for reelection. I think being a shrewd politician like others who get reelected, he's going to be even more progressive like he has been in the past before he was representing a district like that. And
Yeah.
so he will be able to point to more things besides, his repetition invocation that he's going to impeach Trump again. He'll have other things, right, to run on. But it is interesting that he won every city besides South Salt Lake. Which Nate Bluen won by 8 points. He had a really good showing in South Salt Lake, and Bluen won a lot of Central Salt Lake City.
Hmm.
But other than that, pretty much everywhere McAdams won.
Yeah.
So it wasn't as close as people thought, and we'll never know what would have happened if we only had one candidate. And a lot of these people have a really bright future. Like Bluen, Mohammed's going to be great, no matter what they do. They're great progressive
So you've argued
superstars.
in the past that Utah Democrats make up roughly 15% of active voters. And we know that you can't win an election with 15% of voters. So
Hmm.
you touched on this a little bit, but let's tease it out a little bit more.
Yeah.
Walk us through the building blocks of building the anti-MAGA 50% plus one coalition. How is McAdams or someone like McAdams going to build a big enough tent to hold base progressives like Liban and Michael and Nate, also unaffiliated voters who are showing up, like my sweet husband, and then the Romney Republicans all at the
Mhm.
same time?
Yeah. Yeah, it's remarkable. So it's interesting when you think about, how people register and then how they vote. So let's start with that first part of the building block, right? Building block number one is Democrats need to turn out, they need to vote, and they need to register more Democrats. So they're doing that in 2026. It's a huge building block, but it's only like 15%. And if they register another 10,000, they'll be at 16%, if you
Those
round
numbers
up.
are kind of bleak.
Yeah. So, but they're getting in a lot of races, even for governor, Congress, they're always getting in the 30s generally, right? Sometimes the low 30s, the mid 30s, sometimes the high 30s, like Harris, almost getting 40%. So, just right now alone, they're clearly punching way above their weight, right? So, if they're registered at 15, they're getting more than double in pretty much all the races. So,
Hmm.
clearly, when Democrats are running, they're getting a huge share of the unaffiliated vote. Now, the hard thing about the unaffiliated voters is they're younger, they're busier, they're more likely to be renters, right? They're more likely to change addresses. It's not even really their psychology. We don't have to over psychologize what they think. It's just their life circumstances are different, right? They're going to be less reliable to turn out. They're going to turn out more in presidential years. All this stuff is very predictable. We know this based on a lot of research. So, really getting them engaged and inspiring them to say, what's something that's going to get you out to vote, right? We're going to not
Right.
build an ice warehouse, right? We're going to not do this data center, right? What, fill in the blank, right? Whatever it is, those voters really need to be galvanized and inspired to turn out, right? That's half the battle, just
Hmm.
returning that ballot, okay? And then the third part, and let's say that middle group, let's just stick with the second building block for a second. If they are, you know, 40%, right? They're going to make up like 20% of that 50% to getting to 50% for Democrats, right? So that's great. That's a huge help, right? But 20 plus 15 is still what? 35, right? What we talked about. So
Yeah.
then you got to climb the last part of the mountain to get from 35% to 50. And that's where in races like Mike Lee running, right? We came close to seeing this happen where you get enough Republicans voting right against their party. And again, Utah, I think, is pretty much the number one state for anti-MAGA sentiment among Republican voters. So, so that's important. The last thing I would say about building block number three is if you have a Republican who switches over to vote for a Democrat, that's a 2-for-1 trade. because then the Republicans went down one and you went up one, right?
Hmm.
Whereas if you just turn out your own voters, it's just a +1. So that's like a +2, right? Because it's -1
I
plus
see.
one.
So
So
do you think it's in the
that's really big.
party's do you think
Yeah.
it's in the party and candidates' best interest to be talking to moderate Republicans or squishy Republicans?
Yeah, they've got to do both. They got to do both. Like I said, they've got to walk and chew gum at the same time. Uh, it just which is tricky, right? And that's
Yeah.
kind of emblematic of what Ben McAdams will do and has done, and others who do well. Suzanne Harrison, for example, somebody, a Democrat, proud Democrat, who's won countywide in Salt Lake in 2022 and clearly got Republicans to vote for her
Hmm.
beyond Democrats. Um, yeah, it's got to be all three. Your base, the people who don't turn out reliably in the middle, the unaffiliated, which is really skews young in a state like Utah and elsewhere, and then those Romney Republicans, anti-MAGA Republicans. Because again, the way I'm looking at this to summarize is people have had 3 times to vote on Trump and MAGA, right?
Hmm.
2016, 2020, 2024. Okay. So if they have voted against Trump 3 times in a row, they're they're pretty much against MAGA and Trump, right? So the issue for Democrats is connecting and having voters see that like this is enacting Trump's agenda, the MAGA agenda, the anti-immigrant agenda, whatever it is, right? And as you see people make that connection, right? Democrats do better.
Interesting. I want to talk a little bit and dig into some work you've done specifically around LDS voters. So, you ran a statistical model across 127 counties in what some people call the Mormon corridor, which is Arizona, Idaho, Nevada, Utah, and Wyoming. You controlled for race, college attainment, and density. What did you find, and why does it matter in this context?
Yeah, absolutely. So these states of the Mormon corridor, like you said, running down from Idaho, Wyoming through Utah, Nevada, and into Arizona, have a lot of counties. How many counties do they have? Let me take a look here. They've got 127 counties. Okay. And a lot of election results that we have really are at the county level. I wish we had, better data on a lot of stuff, but we just got county data. When you look at those 127 counties, right, like the biggest predictor of a county swinging blue in 2024 was how LDS it was, right? The percentage of the
Stop.
population that's
Is that true?
LDS. It's true. And it's interesting thing in 2024 because this area experienced, home price inflation, COVID, everything that everybody else did. There's got to be something that's making it different, right? All the other things that we expect went in the other direction, right? Hispanic or Latino voters, Native American voters swinging right. We see all of that in the data. It's very clear. Just jumps out in a map, right? That these counties with more LDS people swung more left. Places like Davis County swung 3 points left when the country swung 6 points right. So that means it trended 9 points left of the USA, right?
Wow.
And a county like Davis County, Trump actually lost several thousand votes, right? And Harris went up. Um, so clearly, it's very obvious from the high level data, right? At a high level, the county level data, that corresponds even after control for race, education, population density, right? Volunteering, social capital. It's a big driver. And it's why a place like, Cache County, where Logan is, Davis County, Utah County, where Provo and Orem are, swung more left. I mean, it's remarkable. The last thing I'll add about that is, 80% of the suburban cities on the Wasatch Front all swung left in 2024 in a year where the whole country swing to the right tremendously. So it really stands out both on a map, visually, and then statistically when you run the models. So I think the Mormon corridor really shows that probably the LDS vote is one of the very few demographics beyond, I think, maybe voters age 65 and older Black voters, women as a whole. Um, but that's it, right? Almost everybody else in the country swung right. It's really remarkable.
Okay, so you're a professor at BYU and you do some pretty niche studying of BYU graduates and returned missionaries. And the results of that are pretty striking. So, what you have found is that electorally, younger LDS voters seem to be far less Republican than their parents or grandparents, which is what you were just talking about. And I'm
Um,
curious, as a sociologist, because you're not just
yeah.
focused on the numbers, you're also thinking about the broader picture.
Yep.
What is driving this shift? Is it purely educational polarization? Is it a deeper cultural fracture within the LDS church away from the MAGA movement? Is it something to do with the shifting culture within the LDS church itself?
Yeah, those are great questions. Yeah.
I have many more, don't worry.
Yeah. So I'll say a couple things, right? So first off, there's some really great work by a professor in economics who was able to survey tens of thousands of BYU alumni, right? And so this is kind of looking backwards. Then we'll get to the present day in a second. And looking backwards, return missionaries, this is mostly men, but maybe 22% women, about 78% men. And looking back, people served their mission in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, right? People more my age in the 90s, and then in the 2000s, right? And with every decade, right, for those return missionaries responding to the survey, their Republican identification goes from like 58%, 51, 39 to about 30%. Okay.
51 to 39?
The 58 all the way down to about 29, 30, right?
Wow.
Over those decades.
Over 3 decades?
Over those, 4 total, but yeah.
4 decades. That's a pretty dramatic shift in a population.
It's a big shift. And like I said, it's a very big sample size. It's, 10,000 or more people that he was able to send surveys to. Now, it's clearly only the people who return the survey. Everybody is a college graduate. So automatically they're already in that bucket, right, of the 40% of Americans with a college degree about. And I think 59% of them, I looked up his work, have a post-grad degree, right? So we're talking about educated people who are LDS, but a really big sample when we usually don't get big samples in other surveys. And clearly they're moving away from affiliating with the Republican Party. I mean, that's obvious. You could disagree on the numbers a little bit, but the trend is unmistakable down, right? Now, what's interesting is that in the survey, he also asked them, what about your parents? How do they identify? Right. And it's pretty much the same across every decade, right? It's about 80% of their parents identify as Republican. So that is sociological, like you said. There's something about living through this and going through it earlier in life that does change people's identification or affiliation, right? On a survey, at least, rather with their parents, where it's already established. Maybe they lived through Reagan and, other presidents that really endeared them to the Republican Party, and rightfully so. I understand that, right? But these coming age of effects for those that are younger, right? And when I say younger, even in their 30s and 40s now, right? They're really, really big, right? Apparently. So I found that really interesting jumping off point. I looked at all the tables, right? But again, like I just said, that's 78% men, right? So I'm going, well, how about people today, right? Because a lot more women serve a mission, right? And most people in America who get a college degree, right, are women, right? Not men. So I looked up, the graduation program for 2017 for BYU, and I matched as many people as I could to 33 states. And it's interesting, right? First off, I didn't find any differences in kind of Republican affiliation by gender, right? 50% of the women are Republican and 51% of the men. Now, that's not 80% like their grandparents, right? 50 is a lot lower than 80, but there's no big gender difference, right? And I found a little difference, right? No, I don't want to say little, but I found a meaningful difference that's not enormous. But those who registered to vote before Trump was elected, right, before the 2016 election, about 42% were registering as Democratic or unaffiliated, and then it jumps from 42 to 51% after, right? So clearly there is a Trump effect. I think a lot of people have written about this. Ryan Burge at, the Religion Graphs, Daniel Cox at American Enterprise Institute, myself, Jana Reese. I mean, a lot of us have all identified there is a Trump effect, but how big is it? How lasting is it, right? Does it translate to lower office? All the questions we had earlier, right? So that's really interesting, right? But 2017, that's still, right? That's almost a decade ago now, right? So the last thing I looked at was how about people that have graduated later, right? So these are all people who already graduated, they're already done at BYU. And that group of voters, right, has a lot more women, has a lot more people studying social science, right? It's majority women. And I found among those voters that there is a difference among gender, right? That by gender, excuse me, that women are twice as likely to register as Democrats than men. And that's very consistent with my colleagues work in political science, Quinn Monson, who has very rich surveys. He's been on, Doug Fabrizio, KUER, and talked about how women are really leaving the Republican Party who are LDS much faster than men, where you don't see as much difference with the men. And so I found that 24% of them are registering as Democratic compared to 12% of the men, which is significant, right? Because we just said that in Utah overall, which is only 50% LDS, Utah, right? 15% are registering as Democrats, so 24%. So clearly young, educated, right? Mostly single, right? And then a lot of them going on to higher postgraduate education. This is a group that has moved Democratic at a rapid rate. And that gets to what you said earlier, just for your viewers, right? Educational polarization, right, means that people with a college degree, particularly among white voters, people who are non-Hispanic white in America, they used to be very reliable Republicans, right? They were the kind of the backbone of the Republican Party, but now they become probably the most reliable part of the Democratic coalition in terms of their turnout and swinging blue almost every election. So we're seeing that among BYU grads, returned missionaries, LDS or Mormon voters too. When a lot of people thought that was unthinkable, it's happening. It's happened a lot, right? And Trump really accelerated it.
Yeah, that's a really interesting finding. I think to add to this, just to kind of keep building on these blocks we're working on here, your
Uh-huh.
data also shows a historic decline in LDS self identification
Mm-hmm.
and a massive collapse in active church states in Salt Lake County. You compared Salt Lake County in California to the rest of the world and found that 34 stakes in Salt Lake County in California are closing compared to 37 worldwide. So
Mm-hmm.
these two areas seem to be the center of active decoupling from the LDS Church, despite the LDS Church being headquartered right here in Salt Lake County. So, how do church institutional shifts map onto the shifting political boundaries of the Wasatch Front and go along with all of this data that we've been talking about?
Yeah, I mean, it goes hand in hand. It's remarkable. It's not unique to our church. So many other churches, where their churches are closing, like the Catholic Church in a place like Detroit is just collapsing, for example. But it's absolutely happened, concentrated in Salt Lake County in California, right? And that's two things at the same time, right? Well, it's three things, right? First of all, is older people die, right? Salt Lake City's
Thank you, Professor Rue.
right? Of natural causes. But if you have an area where the membership is older, right, and it's made up of more older people, right, you're not going to have as many, babies and
Mhm.
children. And
Yeah.
that's just consistent. That's not unique to people that are LDS or Mormon. Salt Lake City public schools are closing schools, right? There's not as many children. There's more people marrying later, single people, right? And then just being able to afford a home, right? The affordability crisis. So that's a long running thing that's happened in Salt Lake County where it's older, so you don't have younger families, right? So it's not growing, right? But then you also have the second component, which is disaffiliation, right? People leaving the faith, not attending, even some going to the degree of removing their names, which is much more rare, obviously. But that has happened, right? It's happened to a big degree. And then you have the moving thing, right? And that's related to point number one, right? So a lot of people have left California because it's too unaffordable. And now Utah, we're seeing the same type of crisis, right? Where it's too unaffordable in Salt Lake. So people, right, they're living elsewhere. So it's part of it. Some people look at this and they say, well, there's growth outside of Salt Lake County, so it all kind of cancels out, right? And it's
Mhm.
kind of flat, right? But even flat is different from the past where it was growing. So it's gonna remake the future of Utah's population, and lots of other people are looking at this, right?
And there's something interesting here that you're kind of picking at. Like you have more women getting degrees in higher education. You have more women associating with the Democratic Party. You
Uh-huh.
have later marriage and childbirth, deadlines for folks. And so what you're seeing potentially is, women, highly educated women with high paying jobs in their, late 30s, early 40s, moving into Salt Lake County and Salt Lake City specifically, where they can afford to purchase a home and then continuing to disaffiliate with the church. And that's creating an interesting effect that's driving families out of Salt Lake County towards places like, Taylorsville, West Jordan, and then some of Davis and Utah County. But I also think what you're saying is that Davis and Utah County are also seeing some decline in
Uh-huh.
Republican affiliation.
Yep.
And so there's kind of this like spreading effect where
Yeah.
Salt Lake County is spreading out its liberal voters. Do you think that's because of housing prices?
Yeah, it's partly because of that. Yeah, and the jobs, where the jobs are, right? You have more jobs outside of Salt Lake County, like in
That's
Silicon
interesting.
Slopes, like around Lehigh, right, and other places. Yeah, it's definitely like there's not an invisible wall at the border of Salt Lake County that will contain what has happened there only to Salt Lake County. That will only spread, and we've just seen so much evidence of that. And again, like I say, it's not unique to people that are LDS or to Utah. You see the same thing. Just to give you a few examples, the Texas Triangle metros, right? Dallas, Fort Worth, San Antonio, Austin, Houston, same story, right? Atlanta, biggest story in the country. DC, right? Virginia used to be a red state, then it was purple, now it's becoming a blue state like Colorado. Denver, even Kansas City, right? All these places that are suburban, highly educated, and then becoming more diverse. And like you said, that rising educational attainment is driven by women getting more education. That's really shifted a lot of the suburbs in America blue, right? First purple and now even blue. And that was unthinkable, right? Back in the years of W. Bush and Romney, right? But it's happening nationwide and in Utah.
Yeah, so you've got a really fascinating case study. I did not know this before we started talking for this podcast, and I'm just agog. I think that's the only word for it. So in Salt Lake City proper, you studied the Eagle Gate neighborhood near the Capitol. That's where the fancy Eagle is, so as you drive up towards the Capitol. And it has traditionally had the highest density of LDS general authorities and officers. And for people who are not LDS, that means the authority administrative bodies that make up the church itself. In 2012, it was Republican plus 36. By 2024, it had shifted to Democrat plus 36. That's
Uh-huh.
a net shift of D plus 72. So, first off, can you give us some grounding about how important a net D plus 72 shift means? And then, second, when the actual neighborhood of top church leadership is swinging 72 points left over four presidential election cycles, talk to us about what it says about the broader electoral trends of the church and its believers from the top down.
Yeah, this is really fascinating because, it's so important in the US that we have a secret ballot. We don't have any individuals voted, but we know their neighborhoods. And I'm going to tell you about one other after this one, right? But
Ooh.
this one, where that leadership is concentrated, has gone, like you said, mirror image, right? 36 points Republicans, now 36 points Democratic at the top of the ticket. Um, I even looked at Ben McAdams' race. It was just totally typical of the rest of the area, right? He got about 52, 54%. This precinct has swung blue, so there's really no evidence that in an area like this it has swung towards Trump or MAGA, right? There's no evidence for that, right? All the evidence is for the opposite. It's for the opposite. Now, a lot of the leadership of the church is international and global, not U.S. citizens, right? So that's not a part of it, right? But there's no evidence that where the top leadership of the LDS church is that is swinging Republican. Now, the other one that swung, that's 72 points left. The other one is called the Tree Streets neighborhood, or Wasatch, in Provo, Utah. And that's just across the street from BYU to the east. And it is famously, right, the home of so many professors, right? One of the highest densities of professors. And interestingly, right, Republican registration is still the highest, but that neighborhood swung over 80 points left, right? Even more so, right? And now it became the strongest neighborhood for Kamala Harris in Provo, right? Giving her the biggest net lead, winning it by something like 17 points, swinging so many, and swinging again the last election. So, right, where the most educated professors at BYU are, right, and the top leadership, those are two precincts that have swung left 70 to 80 plus points, right? So that's what makes it really remarkable, and a story about, right, education, right, as well as, religion. Um, but you know what I'm saying? It's really fascinating to just think about what that means. People who are, I don't know what you want to call them, high information voters, right? High
Hmm.
education voters. They have clearly three times in a row, like we said earlier, 2016, 2020, 2024, turned more and more and more those neighborhoods against Trump. So that's pretty undeniable.
And you can't say that these aren't true believing LDS folks because we are talking the people who make up the church administrative infrastructure and leadership. And you're talking about people who work at the church's like landmark keystone
Yeah. Flag
university.
Yeah, the flagship university. Yep.
Like, there's no way to say that this is not a repudiation of, I would say, values and morals coming from within the institution of the religion itself.
Yeah, and it's really caused a deep reflection from people across the political spectrum, people that are Republican, unaffiliated, and Democratic, to say, what does it mean to be a good neighbor? What does it mean to live our values? Um, Even the church put out a statement saying that you can't just vote straight ticket. That's a threat to democracy. That you need to be an informed voter. You may need to be independent. You may need to change your mind each time. You'll have to review things. Even the church's leader, who is a member of the Utah Supreme Court, Dallin H. Oaks, has said that you're going to have to moderate, unify, be independent. And so this is new for some people if just their whole lives they've just been a Republican and always voted Republican and not have to think about it much. Now it's interesting to see people come together across the aisle. And that's probably the hopeful part, right? Where you have Democrats, Republicans, and independents, doing lots of civic engagement organizations, working together and in places that are nonpartisan. Um, that's the positive side, right? That's the positive side. Now, obviously, the negative side is that this whole last 10 years in Utah and in America has divided family members against one another. It's been really, really difficult for, many of the students that I've taught, talking to their own parents. And that pain can't be just, uh, you know, uh, hand waved away, right? That's a
Hmm.
really important thing to acknowledge that the deep polarization and and dangerousness of certain things like January 6th has just really caused a big divide in our country. And a lot of people really want to move on from this.
Hmm.
So I don't know what the future holds, but who's able to help us move on is gonna do well, whoever that person is, or those candidates, whatever party they're from.
So, entering the realm of speculation here, we're
Uh-huh.
decoupling a little bit from your traditional statistics.
Mm-hmm.
We are in 2028 going to see a new slate of Republican leaders step up and try to become the leader of the party following Trump.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, again, speculatively, do you think that the LDS shifts towards the Democratic Party that we've been seeing these last couple of years, is that going to swing back to the right with someone new?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a great question. I'll be super honest and say I really don't know, but I do think it depends on who the person is. If that
Mm,
person is somebody like JD Vance or Mike Lee, that is just really somebody who's been I want to call them like a reliable MAGA foot soldier
hmm.
and so connected to Trump, and somebody like, Vance, who said that people were eating cats and dogs and things that were totally false in Ohio, and he knew it was false.
Hmm.
I think if it's somebody like that who's not popular, I don't think they're going to automatically come back.
That's
Um,
interesting. Thinking about some of the past
yeah,
presidential options like McCain and then Romney as well, I think that those types of characters could bring
yeah,
people, quote unquote, back home to the Republican Party. Do you agree with
yeah.
that?
Yeah, but I mean, again, this is more hypothetical because there's not many
Yeah.
left, right? They've mostly been outcasts, and it's very unlikely they would ever win a Republican primary, right? That's how this all relates, the whole conversation.
Do you think someone like Thomas Massey from Kentucky could bring home Republicans, or do you think that he is also divisive in his own way?
No, yeah, he could be. I mean, he's the kind of person that would appeal, right, to libertarians and principled conservatives in a state like Utah. Yeah, he's somebody who's been very honest and forthright about the wasted opportunity the Republicans had with the tariffs, the war in Iran, and all the unforced errors.
Hmm.
So he sees things clearly. Tom Tillis, who was the senator of North Carolina, right? It's just unlikely that anybody like that. I mean,
Hmm.
the thought experiment is this simple, right? If such a revered president who was so influential, we can all agree how influential he was, like Ronald Reagan, he would never be nominated in the Republican Party today. He would be seen as way too friendly to immigration, refugees, undocumented people. He would never ever get it today, right? So that's where the party has changed. Or it's highly unlikely at that national level to get somebody like Massey or the other ones that we talked about. I just don't think it's going to happen. I mean, I think some Republicans wish that Trump were merely an aberration,
Mhm.
but he's not. He's not, and people voted for him, right? And he won in 2016 because Republican voters put him in that position. That's the hard truth. And then American voters, right? Through a few flukes, right? But he did it. Didn't expect it, obviously. This time they planned for it, right? With Project 2025, the second time that he got elected. Um, but people have to look in the mirror and just say, right? This is what was chosen. Now he never won a majority anytime he ran. He's never won 50%. So that's
He
really
didn't
important.
win 50% in 24?
Nope, he got 49.5 or 0.4, 49 point something. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Denied by
Yeah.
the hair of a point.
Yeah, and won by 1.5, right? So by
Mhm.
very little, very thin, razor thin margin, and all the goodwill, anything he built up is all gone, right? It's coalition with inflation and the tariffs and especially the misconduct of ICE.
Mhm.
The approval rating is so low. So that's a great question. I think that there's those two answers. Right? I think a lot of Republicans wish that they could just turn back the clock. Everybody could be like John Curtis or what, fill in the blank Republican, or even Jeff Flake in Arizona. But it's not going to
Mhm.
happen, right? It's
Yeah.
not going to happen nationally. It could happen to some degree in Utah, hopefully, right? People have agency; they can make choices. But I think nationally, the Republican Party has been completely and thoroughly overtaken by the MAGA movement, which is sad because we need two healthy political parties with good platforms and policies.
Okay, so thinking about how we build that next, slate of, politicians who are able to represent their populace correctly. You've
Mhm,
said that for a pro democracy coalition to win in Utah,
mhm,
earlier in this talk, you said it requires three things: turning out your base Democrats, which means the people who consistently and reliably vote
mhm,
Democratic year after year up and down the ballot; engaging and persuading unaffiliated voters to come and vote for you as a Democrat, both in the primary and in the general election; and persuading or converting anti MAGA Republicans. So I want to dig into this a little bit.
mhm,
First, I want to look at the grassroots, who are the base Democrats.
mhm.
Um, the I want to talk about expanding party caucuses. So you tracked a
Yeah.
400% plus surge in Utah County.
Mhm.
Why is that essential to do before you can even think about trying to convince voters to vote one way or the other? So I guess to just, I feel like I got a little lost in this question. Why do you need to have a very strong base
Mhm.
first and foremost before you
Yeah.
can then go and court other types of voters?
Yeah, I like the emphasis on the order, right? You have to do the base work first, and I think there's kind of two dimensions to that, right? The first one is that in places outside of, say, Salt Lake City and Mill Creek and the places that vote all blue, right, which is most of Utah is outside of those places, you just need people to start with the idea of you're not the only person on your block. You're not the only person in your neighborhood. Here we went to this meeting and we had dozens and dozens and dozens of people organizing, right? Even if they're
Hmm.
not all registered Democrats, right? Which is remarkable. The diverse group of people at this caucuses, right? Some switch their registration, whatever, right? We're all welcome and then we're all there. And then we see just psychologically, we're not alone. Okay. We're not the butt of a joke that people make. There's only one or two, right? And that could be based in a kernel of truth, right? That there probably were meetings in the past with only one or two people, right? Back in the days of George W. Bush and Mitt Romney, they were
Hmm.
lonely affairs, as a friend said to me. But today that's not true, right? So that just psychologically. And then second of all is the organizing, right? Organizing at the precinct level, the House district level. That's something we're working on moving more on. That is critical, right? So that when we say we're going to go out, we're going to protest against ICE, or we're going to register voters, or we're going to have this event, we're going to do volunteer work, we're going to do service. We've got a deployment and we've got a system to do it. And I'm so grateful for the leadership of the Utah County Democratic Party. They've done a phenomenal job. Davis County, similar story. Cache County, right? Just pick a county. They've all been growing, just exploding. And so that's great. So now we got to be on record. And then the third thing I'll say about that is that when you have the organization at the precinct level, right, and this is what the Republican Party knows how to do really well, then you've got everybody knows somebody, right? So you say, all right, now I'm going to talk to somebody about you should vote for Harris for XYZ. I
Mm-hmm.
know this person already, right? They're my neighbor. They're on my block. I've done that work in my own neighborhood, right, and seen tremendous, right? My neighborhood swung 66 points left, right? Um, and so that's really critical, right? You have to be at that level of where people live, right, at their scale. So
Mm-hmm.
I think those are the 3 reasons why you start with that first.
Okay, so we've done the work, we've built the precincts, we have the caucuses, we have our neighborhood captains who are coming and
Right.
talking to each other and organizing. So now, for all of the candidates and campaign managers who are listening to us talk today, I want to dig into the messaging that you think is essential to persuade the additional voters, so the unaffiliated
Yeah.
and the soft, squishy Republicans, to vote for a Democrat in 2026. You have highlighted 4 specific frames. I will name them and then I want to dig through
Mhm.
each of them
Okay.
and then we'll conclude. So you say public funds are for public education, period.
Mhm.
You say Utah is becoming too unaffordable for my family. Democrats have a plan to fix this. You say immigrants made a promise to Utah. Will Utah keep their promise to them? And finally, Utah has changed. Utah's GOP supermajority hasn't. So let's start with public education. Why is this frame so important to suburban moms who might traditionally vote red but are protective of their local schools?
Yeah, I think surveys show that most people like their public schools. 90% of people have their kids in public schools. They know their teachers, they know their principals, they know the people in the community. They always have often have people in their own church community who work at their school. People are generally satisfied with their own public schools. Now, often they'll have an abstract concern that's planted about, public education in general, but they're happy with their own school in general. And that's just a key thing. And I know my friend John Arthur and others have talked about this, and they have more expertise. But in our Constitution, right, these funds are meant for public education. And I know the new
Hmm.
state auditor came out with a report showing lots of abuses of the voucher thing or whatever euphemism they're calling vouchers now. I can't remember what it's called, the scholarship. Um,
Utah fits all scholarship.
yeah, it's like, well, not everybody. Um, but those things tend to reinforce inequality, and it's really interesting because social science often will have a lot of disagreement about something. It takes time to find a consensus about the findings, but the findings on vouchers are pretty overwhelming, right? They don't work because it's not a free market. People don't have perfect information and they don't have free choice. And private schools can disallow people from enrolling, right? And then not give them services. So, on so many levels, it's not like buying a can of beans or a slice of pizza at Costco, the school choice thing, even though it sounds like a good idea that you're empowering people, it always tends to reinforce inequality. It doesn't work. It's not popular. And it didn't get passed in Texas, right, among rural areas because they knew it would hurt them. So that's something that resonates a lot. And we do have a lot of our party in the Democratic Party who are educators and teachers. And so it's a big issue for the base and for us as well. And I think it resonates well with people that just, like you said, suburban moms. And that's something that the reason why I put it number one is because almost every candidate who gave a speech at our county convention mentioned it, right? So it was like a
Mm.
through line that ran through almost nearly everybody, nearly every candidate mentioned this issue.
Yeah. I actually
Uh,
think a lot down in Utah County about the Alpine school district split that voters approved last
yes.
year.
Oh,
That has a pretty big implication for how
yep.
education is run. And you want to talk about that some?
Yeah, I don't know as much, but I can tell you that I know people that are teachers in the former district that are retiring early and leaving early because of that,
Wow.
because they so strongly disagree. People have been driven out. And again, it's going to have these tax-based issues, these fragmentation issues, the inequality issues. It's not, it's not going to be a good thing. People are going to weather it, right, and do well, but it could have been better, right?
Okay.
Yeah. Now,
So,
point number 2 now.
yeah, because the next point is about affordability, which you're touching on here. You say Utah's becoming too unaffordable for my family. Democrats have a plan to fix this. How do Democrats successfully seize the economic narrative in Utah when local housing and gas
Yep.
prices are squeezing families?
Yeah, I think one way is through local leaders starting there, right? Having city by city um, do laws as simple as what are called accessory dwelling units or
Hmm.
ADUs, where I have one on my property and it's been authorized by law for a long time, but it's only because of the part of the city that I live in. And that means I can rent my basement, right? This is a huge source of affordable housing for seniors on a fixed income, for young couples who are in college and graduate school, single moms, immigrant families, name a group, right? They all benefit tremendously. And then they get to live, right, in the neighborhoods with good schools, right? So they're not segregated somewhere else, right? That's why ADUs are so important. And you don't have to build a whole bunch of new things. We have the capacity right now. We have a lot of parts of cities like Provo and parts of Salt Lake that actually parts that aren't growing, right? And so there is space, and we have it. So I think something like ADUs, that reform, making it citywide, statewide, is huge. I know that there is good bipartisan agreement on a lot of this stuff, right? A lot of this is good for developers. It's good for a free market. It's good for housing supply. It's not just about giving people a handout, right? I'm not even talking about giving people a greater voucher to afford housing, which is a much bigger challenge on the coast, say New Jersey and California, for example. I think something like ADUs thing is great. Zoning reform is so important. There are many different places in the state that are doing things differently and having more density and being by transit, like in Vineyard, I think, which is one of the fastest growing cities in America,
Hmm.
that is going well. I mean, Salt Lake City has added, I think, what, 25,000 people in 5 to 10 years. It's been amazing to see the growth. And when you do that, you help things be more affordable, right? Had Salt Lake not built as much, it would actually be even more unaffordable, right? Which is wild to think about, but we know that's true. So this, I mean, the main thing with the housing thing, and then I want to talk about some other issues about affordability, is that people in Utah like to rail against California and how they're against that, and people coming here from California, which is obviously misguided. But I know where it comes from, right? In California, they did not build enough housing for decades, right? We don't have time in this podcast to explain why that is, okay? But that is a bipartisan failure, right, on both parties. And when you don't build enough housing, you have sky high homelessness, you have housing affordability, and then you have people who are priced out. So they live in the desert in Phoenix and right St. George and Las Vegas in particular. Right now, they come up to Utah, right? Because you didn't build enough housing. So we really have to build. And what I tell people is we learn this in Econ 101, right? Supply and demand, you got to build. You obviously have to negotiate that, right? And make it fit with the neighborhood. You got to build smart. I'm not saying you just let developers do whatever they want. You got to build, and then you can be like Texas, right? You say you don't like California. Okay, so be like Texas, right? Austin, Texas is a place where rents have actually gone down, right? Because they built enough housing, right? And
Wow.
so that's what we need to do. People need a place to live, right? These are your neighbors, your people at your church, your work, and your school. And I'm really proud to stand up for new housing in my own neighborhood that's being built right now. So I'm trying to walk the talk, you know what I'm
Hmm.
saying? And do what I preach. Now, the other things are really important because people say in Utah in particular, I want to live by my family. I want my parents, when they retire, to not be priced out, to be able to age in place, is what the term is called. Then I want my kids to be able to afford to come here. And increasingly, people are realizing, wow, I can't have family and extended family because of the affordability. And then the other
Yeah.
thing is we will never be able to afford to live here if the Great Salt Lake dries up, right? And lakes are drying up, multiple ones in California, and it's so expensive to mitigate, and you can't inhabit the area. And we've got millions of people living right where the wind blows, and we've already seen the dust storms this year with arsenic and other heavy metals. So I think it's really starting to set in, and we do have bipartisan agreement. So these are areas where we've got to really show leadership, propose, and then shepherd that through and spend our time on these issues, right?
Okay, so not to just gloss over that, but we're running out of time. So I do want
Yep.
to get to point three. You say that
Yes.
immigrants made a promise to Utah. Will Utah keep their promise to them? And I have to say, I think this is a fascinating frame.
Yep.
It appeals to a sense of duty, honor, and integrity rather than tired partisan national border talking points.
Yep.
What do you think Utah Democrats should be doing to lean into this messaging?
Yeah, I think absolutely we should be there in public hearings. We should be offering expertise. We should be voting, running candidates for the county commission, which we're doing. Um, Protesting, writing letters, inside outside game. But this is a frame that a candidate said. He said, "My parents are immigrants, and they made a promise to Utah, and for the first time, they feel like Utah is breaking that promise," which is so sad because Utah is a leader, it has so many immigrant friendly policies. It's one of the best states in terms of policy. So we need to keep that, be proud of it, and people I do think respond better to saying this is something we're good at. Let's continue to lead out, and it's consistent with our values rather than pointing the finger and, like you said, politicizing it. And now it has gotten to the point where there's obviously very strong majority disagreement with people being killed by ICE for no violation when they weren't even the people that they were looking for. So,
Hmm.
so that's an issue, and especially with the warehouses and other things, the detention centers, where I think that's a winning issue, and we should capitalize on that.
Interesting. And finally, you say that Utah has changed, but Utah's GOP supermajority hasn't. That's pretty big. How does this capture the experiences of unaffiliated voters who feel like the legislature is playing ideological games instead of solving real issues that we've discussed, like
Yeah.
housing, immigration, education, and I think maybe most importantly, a sense of belonging to the great state of Utah?
Yeah. I think with the Olympics coming, the Great Salt Lake drying up, traffic growing, housing unaffordability, there's so many issues we can tackle that we already have agreement. And I think most voters, like you said, are in the middle, are like, why aren't you working on that? Why aren't you devoting your energy to that? And I think this is the first legislative session where we finally saw a turning point where a
Mm-hmm.
lot of moderate legislators just didn't vote for extreme legislation anymore. And a lot of it didn't pass. I know all
Mm-hmm.
12 anti immigrant bills didn't pass. And that's to the goodwill of good folks, right? And we may not agree on everything. We may have a different party. And so that makes me hopeful. But yeah, we have problems to tackle, and we have a looming deadline with the Olympics. The world's eyes will be on us. We can get this done. We have a lot of good to build on, but it is important to have accountability in the local races, break the supermajority toward a better future.
Yeah. So we've talked about these really interesting pieces. And as we wrap up this section, how one of the things I care a lot about is that I am a Democrat, but I also think that we need to be very pragmatic about the state of
Mhm,
Utah, what it
mhm.
looks like, what it's comprised of. And I think that that means we need to have a more moderate messaging, a more moderate tone, more
Mhm.
moderate policies that span the spectrum a little bit better. So, how do we take all of these suggestions you've made and prevent them from sounding like typical partisan complaining and tie it more directly into things that people actually care about that are actually affecting their lives?
Yeah, I just think whatever the issue, right, you tie it to their values, your vision, and like you say, you're moderate in tone and in messaging, but you're principled with your values, right? You don't say, as a Democratic voter, civil rights is like the most important value I have, for example, right? So I'm not gonna relinquish that value, right? I will compromise, right? And we've seen this in protecting LGBTQ people in Utah. We do have some good policies, right? We did lead out in having compromises that did the right thing. So those are examples, and I think immigration is probably the best one, where we have one with the different churches, the Catholic Church, the LDS Church, others, big business, right? And the government saying we are not
Hmm.
going to mass deport families. We're not going to be like other states. We're going to treat people humanely. The police chiefs of all the biggest cities, they all agree with that. They do not cooperate with ICE in Salt Lake, Provo, West Valley, Ogden, right? None of the big cities do that. And they communicate that as well in Spanish and English, right?
Hmm.
And so I think we have to build on that. We have to regain and have maybe a remix, right? As we used to call it when we used to put our cassette tape in the radio, have a remix of the Utah way for the future, where it's not just moderate Republicans and other Republicans, but where Republicans really compromise and negotiate with Democrats and independents to get a new Utah way, to get on the other side of this Trump MAGA era. And we can really lead out. And the whole country really does look to us as a very different type of red state that's very friendly to immigrants, and it's going to have the Olympics twice, which is crazy. Only LA can say that, right? And have the high technology and the housing growth and a diversifying population, and really have that be a positive thing, right? That we can own and say, let's build on this future, right? And make it a place where we want to live and have a high quality of life. I think those are really winning issues. I think people are winning at the local level with that. And so let's do it. Let's do more of it.
Okay, that is such a great note to end on. So, for our final question, how are you finding joy in your life right now?
By going out and hiking the mountains. We did a lot of hikes before the fire started. A lot of our family. It's a wonderful place. Biking to work every day. Just living an active lifestyle. It's a beautiful, wonderful place to live here in Utah. So highly recommend that you get out when it's not smoky, obviously, and lead that active lifestyle. It's been a huge, awesome thing being here. Thank you.
Professor Rugh, thank you for joining us around the counter.
All right, thanks so much.
And thank you for listening today. You can catch Around the Counter with Molly and Friends on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Substack, or anywhere else you get your podcasts. We air on Sugar House Community Radio Sundays at 8 p.m. and Wednesdays at 7 a.m. Oh, Jake, you did so good. Thank you.
I tried. Sometimes